that again.
The Wheel of the Five Senses is unique in the world. There is not another like it.
Thank you.
Use the charger that came with your phone. Well, it says use the charger that came with your phone, but that one is an iPad charger. So that's not that one. I think that one in. Oh, there's a bit attached and then if necessary I'll change it. Right, that's that. And they did say to do something. Log out of this in between, I think.
Or you have to do it your own.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it should be enough to
And just candles.
At the time that the tower was built, did they have glass?
Yes,
They did have glass.
It's very, very expensive.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because the Romans, really, they had glass.
Yeah.
The Romans,
That would be quite a feature.
yeah, Roman glass. One of the things we don't know almost anything about this place because there's no document, there's no written documentation. We do know that this was built, this tower itself was built by about 1300. The farmhouse, etc., was there beforehand, so the tower was built on the end. Now, the original, there are some changes that have happened. That was not a door, that was a window. You can see there was a window, and it was exactly the same as that. Okay, so the entrance to this place was through that door there, which still goes through to the house. But the house is owned by a private person, and this is owned by English Heritage. That was good. You will also see that around and back there are bits of the plasterwork have been altered. For instance, here you can see that it's been repaired because it was actually coming away from the walls. Okay, that was recently. Most of this has been recently repaired by some students from the Court Institute who are doing repairs of medieval items. And you can see that's where the colour is. So there's an awful lot lost. But this is regarded as the best example of wall paintings in the whole of Western Europe. So it's it's really very, very rare. And that's because there are religious paintings and there's also secular, ordinary paintings. Okay. So, my interpretation of this reminds me of a classroom, a children's classroom in our country. If you went into a junior school, you'd have all different stories on the walls, wouldn't you? And that, I think, is what this is about. And again, I think this was actually commissioned by Lady Thorpe. So often in the medieval times, when men became successful, which this guy Robert Thorpe did, you probably read about that, he became quite successful and wealthy, bought this place, so he had the farmhouse, and to please his wife, he built the tower. This was a very common thing to do, to show off how wealthy he was, a bit like having a big Lamborghini or a big Porsche sitting on the driveway. It's that sort of, fair enough, And so I think that he built this for his wife, Lady Thorpe, and I think that she decided on the paintings. Because if you notice, these are all the sorts of things that a woman would choose, and I don't mean to be sexist, but if it was a man in those days, it would all been about war. Kings still went to war at the head of their column. They actually fought with their swords and whatever, even in those days. So, if it had been him, he would have had all those sort of things on the wall. This is very female and wants to teach. Okay. So anyway, we don't know who actually painted it. Again, there's a lot of guesswork. Probably they were actual painters and decorators who specialised in these things. They probably had some help from the monks of the Abbey, which is the cathedral now. Peterborough in those days, in the 1300s, was the fourth wealthiest monastery in the whole of England. So it's a very, very important place. And that has to some bearing on about dating this as well. I said the paintings were done by, we think, travelling painters and decorators. And you see that some of it is very, very professional, for instance, and artistic. If you look at that, you can see that whoever is standing there, he's teaching. You can see he's talking to the other person. Whereas, so that would be a master artist. Whereas if you look up there, those rabbits are quite probably done by apprentices, because they're the sort of thing that the young people, when they do their first rabbit, that would be the sort of thing that it would look like. Okay, so we know this town was built 1300. When were the paintings put on? Well, over the years we've gradually narrowed it down because of what we've discovered. Behind you here, that gentleman there has got the fashion clothes which are dated at 1320. We had an expert on medieval costumes and fashion, and they were absolutely adamant that that was 1320. So that gives us a base point. So this wall here, I'll do it in order now, and then you won't have to keep it. This item here is a shield, okay, as you see. But this is a very special shield. It's the shield of England, with the three lines on. In fact, they are leopards, but it's the three lines, as per this one. That's what. Okay. If you look hard enough, you can see the outline. They're still, but that's the shield of England. Now that's very important because because in 1340 it was changed to that one, because Edward III, the king then, declared war on the French Republic, and he started the 100 Years' War. Okay, and he started that because the French king had actually raided his lands that belonged to Edward III in France, and he went to get them back. A bit like Russia invading Ukraine now. It was that sort of issue. But France had invaded bits of Normandy, Brittany, and that actually belonged to Edward III. So he started the 100 Years' War. Well, you can see that is not that shield. So 1340 is the top date. So we've got a 20-year situation. Now, this figure here, you can see is a king, because he's got a crown crown on his head. And this person here, we know, is Edmund of Woodstock. And the reason we know that is because that shield there is Edmund of Woodstock's shield, first Earl of Kent. And this is what the shield looks like. It's that shield there. Okay, with the white edging. You see the white edging, you look at it, you can see the white edging, and in the middle were the three lines. That's Edmund of Woodstock. Now there's quite a lot of history behind that. As you know, they were all the barons and that were always trying to get bits of land and fighting each other to some degree. Anyway, Edmund of Woodstock, he was half brother to Edward II. Okay. Now, his father, Edward I, had declared that when he died, Edmund of Woodstock would get most of Cornwall and a big chunk of Lincolnshire would be given to him. Anyway, he died, and his son, our eldest son, Edward II, took over. Unfortunately, he decided that he wouldn't do that, and he didn't give his half-brother the land. That didn't please Edward of Woodstock very much. So there was a bit of, they were a bit upset there. Edward II was a little bit of an unfortunate king because he had quite a lot to fight. He lost, his lands had been invaded again by the French king. However, he did actually he married the sister of the King of France, so she was a French princess, Isabella. So he married her, and they had Edward III. In 1325, he decided that he was going to send, this is Edward II, he would send his wife, Isabella, to France to try and persuade her father to give the lands back, her brother to give the lands back. However, when she got there, she didn't do that. She took up with a chap by the name of Mortimer, who had been exiled from England because he'd caused a lot of problems in Wales. And they paired up as lovers. And in the meantime, she took Edward III with her to France. And in 1327, they invaded England. They landed somewhere near Ipswich, between Ipswich and Felixstowe on the River Orwell, marched on London, and the Londoners accepted them. And Edward III, who was only 14, he was crowned king. And this Isabella and Mortimer then acted as regents. They were doing the ruling. Now, Edmund of Woodstock, he had initially supported them and supported them invading England, but then he fell out with Mortimer. And then he was found out for treason, and Mortimer executed him. Unfortunately for Mortimer, Edmund of Woodstock was the favourite uncle of Edward III. And so he was only 14 at the time, so 3 years, and eventually, in 1330, he took over being king again, arrested Mortimer and had him executed for treason. Shortly after he'd done that, he then pardoned his uncle, Edmund of Woodstock. So this was, the reason I'm saying this is, you would not, if you were sensible, put the picture of a traitor on your wall, particularly as Edward III almost certainly came here and almost certainly probably slept in this very room where you're sitting now. No proof, but very, very likely. So, in 1330, 31, he was pardoned. So, the paintings are 1332 to 1340. Okay, that's the sort of historic argument I've got to prove that. Now, the reason I say that Edward III came here, if you remember, I said that the abbey was the fourth wealthiest. Now, as king, you have to raise an army, and you have to pay it. You have to get wages and get horses and boats and goodness knows what, and particularly with the 100 Years' War. And where do you come for money? you come to where the money is, the wealth. And we know Edward III came here. We know that because the Abbey has got records of the costs that the king incurred when he was here, because he had to be entertained and be fed, all the horses had to be watered and fed, and all that sort of thing. So they did actually pay quite a lot. The other thing that we know as well, that Robert Thorpe, who owned this place, actually was Chancellor at the Abbey, and he became friendly with Edward III, and he became Chancellor to Edward III. So in fact, he was one of the first Chancellors of the Exchequer to Edward III. And hence, if you were coming up here, coming from London to come and borrow money, or tax money, or however you got it, where would you prefer to stay? Would you want to stay in a drafty old monastery with monks chanting at 3 o'clock in the morning? No, you'd want to be in a nice warm household. I mean, you know, nice and warm, fireplace. Yeah, a lot more comfortable, I would think. So that's why I think he stayed here. But again, no proof. It's just my idea of what it is. Okay, right now we'll carry on. We're going through the wall. Now you see that on that wall, you've got a checkerboard pattern. That represents the Chancery, in my opinion. If you remember, we talked about exchequer. That's what that's what it's all about. And in those days, they used a checkerboard to do the counting and to count up the money. And we know that down in London, they used to order checkered cloth to do the calculation. And they did that every year. Now, when Lord Thorpe became Chancellor of the Exchequer in London, I think when the old cloth was thrown away, he brought a piece back to show how important he was, and he hung on the wall there. That's my opinion, so I can't prove it. And of course, they also used that to count on here, because when the around here would all been little farms and small holdings, and so the farmers here would come in once a quarter to pay their rent for the land, but also they would want to get him to pay them for chickens and eggs and whatever, feed for his horses and that sort of thing. So there would have been a calculation, a reckoning, and they would have had a clock on the table in here probably to do that work. So that could have been used for that purpose.
Did he own all the land?
Sorry?
Did he own all the land?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I don't think we've got any proof of how much, but it was quite a lot. I mean, it would be all of Longthorp, certainly. You know, right to the probably the city boundary, which was somewhere halfway up Mayor's Walk, if you know Peterborough, and Thorpe Road, and all that would have been Longthorp, I would have thought. But we you know, again, I haven't got proof. I don't know. So I think that's what the checkerboard is there. Now, on the wall, there's that which is quite famous. Now that's a bonacon. There. That's an ox-like animal, so it's a bit like a bull. Yeah, I don't know. That's that brilliant. That's one. There we go. That's from somewhere else. And basically, it defended itself by shooting flaming poo out of its bottom. And you can see, so that's what that is. You can see the flame coming out there, and then you've got a bowman there threatening it. It's not that silly, because actually, you know, cows and cattle, when they eat, they do pass a lot of methane, and you can actually light it. I mean, it is actually physical. So, and the bonacon was contained in a book which is called Bestiary, which was written by the monks. And the original copy is in Cambridge University, but there is a copy in Peterborough Museum. And that contained all the animals that they thought existed in the world, and a few mythical ones, like the bonacon. There was a unicorn, so they were all in there. And we think that's where it derived from. Okay, turning to this wall there, you face that one. Across the top there, you've got the 12 months of the year. So there you've got an old man by a fire, warming himself. I can't remember what that one is. That one is a man who's digging. You can see he's tied up his clothes and he's digging with a wooden spade, and you can actually, when you get close to it, you can actually see the metal bit on the edge there. So he's digging the soil. That one was somebody sowing seed. You can't, that piece of plaster dropped out and they had to repair all that. But that was sowing seed. The rest have been missing for a long, long while until this one here, which actually is a man killing a pig for Christmas. And we have got this is what they look like, we think. That's what we think they look. They're not exactly the same, but they're similar to the ones that in a church that we've seen. Okay, so that's the 12 months of the year, and again that would have been very useful to them, because if the farmers had come in here to pay their dues, they said, well, that's January. 3 months later, in April, that's when you pay again, and they can do it again. So basically, it's a calendar. In the middle there is again another story, an allegory. This is Saint Anthony. And now Saint Anthony was an Egyptian saint, and he was one of these all-purpose saints. He was saint of grave diggers. He was saint of people with bad skins, psoriasis and all that sort of thing, boils and things. And he was also the patron saint of basket makers. So hence we've got a basket maker there. Now they're making a hazel basket, and we know it's a hazel basket because they're using a little hammer, a mallet, to knock down the withers, and you weave them. You weave a willow basket, but that's a hazel basket. We're not really sure who that is. Some people think that's an angel. Other people think that they're holding a catapult, which would how they would kill birds out on the water, wildfowl on the water. And in the middle there, basically, it's all in Latin, but we have got a translation of some of that. Basically, St. Anthony is saying, work hard like these people, and you will see God. And God is actually looking out through the clouds there. What this is, again, we think there might be something to do with the Ascension. Easter, where we are now, you've got a little hole there where the rabbits come out of, and the birds are the doves, possibly the doves of peace. That black is probably originally was white, but because the colours that they used were organic, a lot of the white and the pink has gone black because of fungi and bacterial infection. Now the rabbits are interesting because they are a sign of Easter. Yeah. Now they are pre-Christian rabbits because the goddess Easter, which is a Greek goddess, that was her symbol, was rabbits, and that's why even today we have rabbits at Easter. Hence the word Easter, for the Greek god Easter. Here we have another allegory. As I said, this is supposedly the tree of knowledge, and the person here is obviously a professor because he's got the floppy hat, beard, long cloak, and you can see he's talking, teaching this other person. We think this is Aristotle, and we think that that is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, as you possibly may know or remember, actually died in 332 BC, so that's 1,000 years later this. But he was very famous because, I mean, he basically conquered all of the Mediterranean and right through Egypt and into bits of Mesopotamia. And in fact, I mean, in Egypt, he started the Ptolemy dynasty, so I mean, but he died at 33 years old, so he did rather a lot in his short life. But anyway, the reason for that on the wall, we think, is that was given as the example of a very clever man teaching the knowledge to him, and he was the perfect example of a good king, a good ruler, a good leader. That's what we think that's on there for. Okay, so going to this wall, we've got a mixture of things there. Over the top, over there, we've got the 7 Ages of Man. That was made very famous by Shakespeare, of course, in 15, or whatever it was, some 300 years later. So he didn't invent the 7 Ages of Man, but that's what this is. So you've got a baby in a crib, you've got a young person playing with a toy, we think it's a top. Can't remember what that one was. That one is a young teenager who's doing hawking. They're actually, and you can see the withers hanging down where the birds would be tethered. There you've got a soldier, so this is sort of early 20s. He goes off to war and you can see the sword hanging down there. When he comes back, he's wealthy, he becomes a businessman, and you can see the businessman, and he's holding a scroll which is something like a contract, and then he gets older and he's got a stick and he's an old man, and in fact there is a Latin inscription along there which says decrepitus, which means old man. In the middle you've got something that's very, very familiar to us, and that's a nativity scene. So you've got Mary with the baby Jesus, you've got Joseph there on the right, and you've got the animals at the back. Now what's surprising about this is that the very first depiction of a nativity scene with animals was St. Francis of Assisi in 1222. So only 100 years earlier, which in medieval terms it was pretty, close to being modern information. So that's what's really unusual about that. So it's such a modern idea. Across here, you've got all the disciples, the apostles, all the way along, all the way through here. Most of them, all of them, they're holding different things. I think there's St. Peter there, and he's holding the keys, the cross keys. And that's why Peterborough, if you look at Peterborough, on the coat of arms of Peterborough, you've got cross keys, yeah? And that's because St. Peter held the keys to heaven. That's what they represented. So that's why you've always got keys on Peterborough. Now these are all men, apart from that one's an odd one. That's a woman. Now the reason for that, we think, is that the one saint that's missing is St. Matthew along there, because he was represented in the ceiling. Now that's all gone, but up there were the 4 gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. And rather than put Matthew in twice, they put this one in here, and what it says basically there, but again in Latin, is Mother Church, and that's what that represents. So it's the Holy Catholic Church, Mother Church. And of course, it's Catholic Church because it was what we term now as Roman Catholic, because this is long before the Protestant Revolution. In this alcove here, coming back to my theory about teaching, you've got a woman teaching a pair of boys here, and they would have sat on these stones, because if you're going to write or read, you would want good daylight, because otherwise the only other light, we didn't have the door, they would have needed good light, and so these settles were very important, and people would have possibly done sewing and that sort of thing, things that they needed to have good light. So that's a woman teaching 2 boys. On the opposite side, there's another alcove, and that's a man teaching 2 girls over on that side. So that gets you the teaching sort of idea, in my opinion. Along here, we've got, and dotted around the room, are several other features. You've got some birds there. We think that that's possibly a heron. That's probably an ibis. They knew about all these creatures. And here that's probably a great bustard. all three of these still exist. Great bustards have now been reintroduced to on Salisbury Plain. They're about the size of a turkey, small turkey, and they became extinct because they don't fly, and consequently were probably good eating, and they disappeared from England. But they are probably going to be reintroduced locally up in Thetford Chase. That's what they're thinking at the moment. But,
You said they were extinct.
well, they went extinct in this country, but they got from the continent.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So they didn't go totally extinct in the world, but but I say that all these birds. I mean, the ibis is a bird that you see in Africa, and was a sacred bird of Egypt. But there's some argument about what some of these birds are, whether that was an emu. They would have known about those sort of things. Anything from Africa they would have known, because the Romans collected them and used them for sport and that. But anything from Australia or obviously America, wasn't known at the time. Although, they weren't far off 100 years later, of course. Columbus and Vespucci went to America. Okay, right, so I suppose the most famous item here is this one here, which is the wheel of the five senses. Now, this is absolutely unique. There is no other wheel of the five senses that we know of anywhere in the world. So it's totally unique. And in fact, only last season, I had somebody come and he was really excited about the picture of the spider's web. He reckoned that was the oldest depiction of a spider's web that he knew, and he specialised in spiders, arachna, whatever. Okay, so five senses. You've got a monkey there for taste. You've got the vulture there for smell. In fact, of course, they've got jolly good eyesight as well. We know that now. Spider for touch. And then you've got a wild boar for hearing. Because even nowadays, various places have got wild boar. They have very, very good hearing. They can feel vibrations through the soil as well. But they haven't got very good eyesight. So pigs who still haven't got very good eyesight. And there you've got a cockerel for sight, because it was the creature that first saw the dawn. You can see the artist made a mistake, but he rubbed it out. The imprint of the cockerel there. The other thing I didn't mention was this fireplace. This is quite rare. Somebody told us that they reckon there's less than 10 of them left in the whole of the UK in that condition. So that's a very rare fireplace. Fireplaces only came into Europe in the 11th century, so this is only 100 odd years later that they built this.
So in fact, the flue goes all the way up, right?
Yeah, well, there's a proper chimney, but it's blocked up now, of course. Yeah, I mean, even in Shakespeare's day, in the 16th century, they still built houses with a fire in the middle and a hole in the roof, or a louvre in the roof. So, I mean, this is very rare. And so many of them have been knocked down, of course. On the wall as you go out, because you can't see it from where you are, there's the story of the three princes and the three dead people. The idea of this is quite a common allegory that you see in churches and various places in the UK. But the story is that three princes are riding through the forest one day, and they come across these three what we would call today zombies. And so you've got one that's just died, you've got one that's a bit decomposed, and then you've got one that's basically a skeleton. And they say to the princes, do good in the world while you're there, because otherwise you'll end up like us, walking in that sort of state. Right, well, that's me sort of more or less finished. Any questions?
No, it was really interesting.
Fascinating. The guidebook is very good. I mean, I'm not saying I particularly want to sell it, but they are very good. Actually, that shows you the house.